Nanawa nervously whispered to Roland, "Please be gentle, I don't want it to be painful." Roland grinned and replied, "Don't worry, it'll be over very quickly." Meanwhile, poor Carter was struggling to hold onto a screaming chicken that was flapping its wings like crazy. It was as if the chicken was auditioning for a role in a horror movie. As Roland began to make his move, Nanawa clenched her teeth, preparing for the worst. But just as she was about to scream, the chicken let out a blood-curdling screech with its feather flying everywhere. Nanawa stretched out her tiny arms toward the injured chicken, using her special powers to heal it. Within seconds, the chicken went from looking like a sad sack of feathers to being so energetic, it seemed like it was on steroids. The little guy was bouncing around like it wasn't a chicken, but a majestic eagle soaring through the skies. Hours had passed, and the poor chicken had been put through the ringer with various tests and procedures. Its little body was now cold and lifeless, cradled gently in Carter's warm arms, as Roland concluded that Nanawa's ability can recover damaged parts of the body, but her power cannot grow out a new limb, but a limb that has been reattached to the body can be healed completely, nor can she bring the dead back to life. After the conclusion was reached, Roland ordered Carter to take the chicken back to the kitchen. Nanawa stood off to the side, tears streaming down her face. She bit her lip, trying to hold back her emotions after witnessing so much today. Roland noticed that Nanawa was still feeling a bit down after the earlier events, so he had an idea to cheer her up. He invited her to a delightful picnic. Nanawa's eyes lit up with excitement as she saw the table overflowing with delicious dishes. Full of various desserts as she took a seat at the table, Nanawa couldn't help but feel like all the sadness from earlier had vanished into thin air. She was surrounded by good food, good company, and good vibes. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Carter escorted Nanawa out of the residence. Nanawa was beaming with joy and even waved goodbye to Roland, promising to see him again tomorrow. Anna, who was standing beside Roland, couldn't help but wonder why he didn't try to convince Nanawa to stay. After all, she was a fellow witch. Roland looked towards Nanawa as she walked away, a small smile playing on his lips. "Nanawa still has her family," he said softly to Anna. "For now, they don't know about her powers." Anna looked down at her feet, as she knew how difficult it was to keep one's witch abilities a secret from loved ones, but the moment they knew, they will always turn in the witch to the Holy Church. It's only a matter of time. Roland noticed that Anna seemed a little down, so he asked if she missed her father. Without hesitation, Anna declared that she didn't. Roland felt a pang of sadness at the thought. Biting his lips unsure of what to say next, Roland quickly changed the topic. "From now on, Nanawa will be coming over often," he said. "Hopefully every day. I have the intention of training her powers." Roland stood tall and spoke with a determined tone. "I promise you, Anna, that as long as I'm here, all witches will be treated equally and live like normal people," he declared. "I know we can make this day come, and I won't rest until we do." Ever since Carl took over the project of building the wall, Roland found himself with more free time on his hands. He spent his afternoons sipping tea with Anna and Nanawa, watching as they practiced their magical abilities and honed their skills. At first, Roland felt a bit guilty about not being more involved in the wall project, but as he watched Carl and his team work tirelessly day after day, he realized that he could trust them to get the job done. Barav barged into Roland's office in a state of panic. "We've got a big problem, Your Highness," he exclaimed, sweat beading on his bald forehead. "We've been spending way too much money on recruiting handymen and craftsmen. Our finances are running dangerously low." Roland leaned back in his chair, can't help but feel helpless, as he is also poor, scratching his head, desperately trying to find an idea. As Barav observed the fourth prince, he couldn't help but marvel at how much Roland had changed since their time at the Grey Castle. Back then, Roland was nothing but a notorious playboy with a terrible reputation and no sense of being a noble. Barav had only come to this small border town because the king had promised him the position of official finance minister. However, when Roland arrived in the town, he started offending every noble he came across, and people would often ridicule him. But everything changed when Roland saved that witch. Barav couldn't believe how much Roland had transformed since then. He was a different person altogether. Roland was so focused on solving the town's financial problems that he didn't notice the bewildered expression on Barav's face. After a few moments of silence, Roland explained that he had been studying the town's problems and had come up with a plan to improve the income. Barav was still in shock, but he realized that Roland was serious and had a genuine desire to help the people of the town. As Roland continued to explain his plan, Barav couldn't help but wonder if Roland was possessed by a devil. But then he remembered the time when Roland had touched a locket that has the power to disperse any demonic power within him. As they walked through the empty pier, the ambassador couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. "Looks like the border town is still struggling," he muttered to his secretary. But their surprise grew as they noticed the lack of ore in the yard. "Where have all the shipments gone?" the secretary wondered aloud. Their curiosity was piqued, and they decided to pay a visit to Roland in his castle. As they made their way there, they speculated whether the border town had found a new trading partner. The ambassador couldn't help but feel a little uneasy about the situation. He had planned to monopolize the trading route, but with the fourth prince's recent actions, it seemed that his plans would no longer be successful. As they approached the front gate of the border town, the ambassador couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. Will the fourth prince surprise him? Roland invited the ambassador to a welcome dinner, but instead of the usual silverware, they were presented with 2 wooden sticks. The ambassador was a bit confused, never having used chopsticks before, and watched as Roland deftly picked up his food with ease. Trying to copy him, the ambassador focused heavily on trying to pick up a cherry tomato, but just as he was about to succeed, Roland suddenly asked him a question, causing the ambassador to jump and launch the tomato high up in the air. Roland then asked the ambassador what he thinks about the chopsticks, as chopsticks are much easier to obtain than silverware, and his people no longer have to worry about diseases entering their mouths due to them always eating by grabbing the food. The ambassador couldn't help but feel impressed by the fourth prince's intelligence. Roland continued by telling the ambassador due to a cave-in, they can't harvest anything from the mines until the next year. The ambassador followed by asking what about the harvest from the past 2 months. Roland told him that the harvest is not enough to feed his people and reminded the ambassador what happened during the month of the demon 2 years ago. Roland leaned forward and looked directly at the ambassador, his eyes filled with conviction. "We need to find a better solution," he declared. "We can't keep relying on the same old methods that have failed us in the past." The ambassador neither agreed nor declined, but instead dished out a half-baked plan. He suggested that the noble families lend an extra month's worth of food, and Roland's people could pay them back slowly next year. Roland was not having it. He shook his head in disappointment and exclaimed, the Willow Town was willing to use their gold royals to purchase anything, including Roland's ores, while also selling food at market value. Roland gave the ambassador a piece of his mind. He gave the ambassador a once-over and said, "I don't think you have any authority to make decisions for the noble families." The ambassador was at a loss for words, his mind racing with memories of his father. He had tried to convince his father that the fourth prince will not use ores for grains and bread and they shouldn't rip them off. But his father had just sneered and called the fourth prince a pig, saying he understands nothing. Roland had hit the nail on the head. The ambassador couldn't even convince his own father, let alone the other 5 families. But he wasn't going to let Roland walk away without a fight. He raised 3 fingers and offered a price even higher than what the Willow Town had offered. He pleaded with Roland. "Let me go back to Changgu's stronghold and try to convince the other families. I'll bring a new agreement back with me." But as he spoke, his voice trailed off, and he seemed less confident by the second. It was as if he knew deep down that he was fighting a losing battle. The ambassador was still trying to convince Roland to stick with Changgu's stronghold. "The Willow Town is too far away, especially during the month of the demons. It's just too risky and it's easy. Something dangerous to happen." The words slipped out of his mouth before he even realized it. As he accidentally threatened the fourth prince. Roland couldn't help but chuckle at the ambassador's continued attempts to convince him to work with Changgu's stronghold or Willow Town. "You know, I have no intention of becoming a refugee," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not leaving Border Town." He then boldly proclaimed, "One day, Border Town will be the new border for the kingdom." He even went as far as to invite the ambassador to come to see the massive wall they were building in the north slope. The ambassador was left in a state of shock, slowly remembering how his own family and other nobles had ridiculed the fourth prince for his wall-building project. A wall, you say? He asked, still trying to wrap his head around the idea. In his mind, he starts seeing why everyone is calling him a psycho and don't take him seriously. As Roland entered his residence, he was startled to find a shadowy figure sitting on his bed. The figure congratulated Roland on his negotiations with the ambassador, but Roland's senses were on high alert as he started running towards the exit. Suddenly, the girl in a cloak tossed a dagger between Roland and the door, blocking his escape. Despite her threatening gesture, the girl claimed she had come in peace to have a conversation. Roland cautiously asked for her identity. The girl stood up and said she doesn't have a name, but her sisters call her Nightingale, as she kneeled on the ground and vowed respect to Roland for protecting and taking care of the witches. Roland scratched his head, trying to make sense of the situation when he noticed the badge on the Nightingale's cloak. It was unmistakably the emblem of a witch association. As they spoke, the tension grew palpable, but Roland couldn't help feeling a bit of admiration for the Nightingale's boldness. She had been following him for a week, and apparently knew about Manhwa and Anna. This terrified Roland as he had no idea someone had been watching him this close. As Roland was still showing signs of aggression, so Nightingale decided to take matters into her own hands. She shed her cloak and invited Roland to take a closer look. As she revealed her true appearance, Roland was taken aback. She had stunning golden blonde hair, piercing purple eyes, and a svelte figure that could make any man weak in the knees. As Nightingale tapped the edge of the bed, inviting Roland to come closer, he couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and caution. But seeing that Nightingale didn't seem to pose any immediate danger, he cautiously sat closer to her. Suddenly, Nightingale grabbed Roland's chin with her fingers and tilted his head towards her, admiring his confidence with a playful smirk on her face. Nightingale couldn't help but admire Roland's boldness in the face of witches like her, and as she leaned in closer, Roland's face turned beet red. But the playful moment quickly turned serious as Nightingale revealed her true intentions, to take Manhwa and Anna away. Roland immediately jumped up and shouted a resounding no. He insisted that they were safe and happy in Border Town and that he would do everything in his power to protect them. After all, there's no place safer than the Border Town. Nightingale insisted that she will bring them back to the Witch Association, where they can find comrades. She shivered as she talked, but Roland immediately cut her off and revealed the real situation they are in. They have no fixed camp to stay, as they are constantly running away, hiding from other people. Despite their harsh living conditions, Nightingale continued to plead her case. Roland argued that they won't survive long like that, with no water, no food, no warm shelter, and the month of the demons also arriving. But something clicked in Roland's mind as he remembered that Bhairav once told him that the purpose of the Witch Association is to gather all witches and look for the Holy Mountain. Roland questioned Nightingale on this matter, but Nightingale refused to answer. Roland's mind raced as he tried to come up with a solution. Suddenly, a light bulb went off in his head, and he had a brilliant idea. He proposed to Nightingale that they invite all of the witches to Border Town for the months of demons. Not only would they have a safe place to stay, and once the month was over, they could continue their search for the Holy Mountain. Nightingale's excitement was quickly replaced by a sense of worry as she reminded Roland that his people might not be as accepting of witches as he is. She cautioned that once exposed, the church would come looking for them. Roland, frustrated by the situation, clenched his fists in frustration as he realized that there was no quick solution to change the perception of witches in the minds of his people. And the fear of witches is deeply ingrained in the hearts of many. Nightingale dropped a bombshell, revealing that Manhwa and Anna are approaching the age of awakening, causing Roland to be taken aback. Nightingale then shifted her tone and asked Roland if he knew the reason why the witches are viewed as the incarnation of the devil. Roland was puzzled and replied that he had no idea. Nightingale went on to explain the terrifying fate that awaited Manhwa and Anna as they approached their 18th birthdays. Every year during the months of the demons, they would suffer excruciating pain as the devil within them ravaged their bodies. The pain was unbearable, like being ripped apart from the inside out. Those who were strong enough could recover after a few days, but for those who were not, their bodies would twist and contort into grotesque shapes before finally dying a painful death. This is the reason why people view the witches as the incarnation of the devil. Roland then questions what happens after the coming of age. Nightingale explained that once they reach the coming of age, their power will become stable and increase substantially, with the possibility of creating a new branch of magic. Roland was in a tight spot. On one hand, he needed Anna and Nanawa's help for the months of the demons, but on the other hand, he couldn't risk their lives. So he let the girls make the final decision. Nightingale nodded in appreciation of Roland's democratic approach. Anna was resolute in her response. "I'm staying here," she declared. Both Roland and Nightingale were taken aback. "Don't you understand the danger you're in?" Nightingale pressed on, telling that she is much safer in the witch camp. Anna turned her gaze towards Roland, a determined look in her eyes. She spoke from the bottom of her heart, saying that she didn't care about going back to the academy to learn with other children like Nanawa, nor did she care about living a normal life. All she wanted was to stay by Roland's side, no matter what. With determination in her eyes, promising that she will not be devoured by the devil and she will prevail over it, Nightingale let out a deep sigh. Seeing that she wasn't able to convince Anna, she decided to stay in hope to help out Anna if she ever needs help. But Roland was afraid that she will keep stalking him for the entire winter. She once again warned Anna of the danger within her, and her own experience when she struggled at the edge of death countless times and seen her comrades die in front of her, and ensuring Anna that if she doesn't endure through it, she knows how to deal what happens after. As she retrieved her dagger from the wall, she vanished into the thin air. Roland was amazed by the Nightingale's power, almost as if she was a natural-born assassin. Roland gently placed his hand on Anna's head and spoke in a soothing tone. "It's time for you to rest now, Anna." Anna gazed at Roland with a loving look and quietly called him a fool. Roland stood tall in the midst of the border castle, his voice booming with authority as he shared his plans for the future. As he announced the negotiations with the ambassador, he made it clear that they had hit a dead end. He claimed that just like 2 years ago, the ambassador refused to budge an inch. Roland's heart was heavy as he reminded the people of the tragedy that had struck Border Town back then. Over 20% of its residents had perished in the merciless grip of winter, leaving countless families shattered and broken. The air was thick with grief as people remembered their lost loved ones, their eyes brimming with tears. He questioned if everyone are prepared to lose their loved one again. The crowd was hopeless and crying for the prince to save them. Roland cleared his throat and shifted his tone to a more confident and upbeat one. He declared to his people that he would not abandon them and that they deserved better than the terrible deal that the Chengdu stronghold had offered. He reminded them how they supposed to trade 2 months' worth of ore in exchange for a half-year's worth of food, but instead, Changji stronghold only give them 2 months of food. The anger and frustration within the crowd were palpable. But Roland quickly assured them that he had found a solution. He had traded their ore with merchants from Willowtown and had secured enough food to feed everyone through the harsh winter. As the crowd began to applaud and cheer, Roland stopped them, notifying them of urgent information that they will no longer be accepted into the Changji stronghold. So they must spend the winter at the border town. This struck the crowd like a bolt of lightning, as people shiver in fear what they have to face next, but Roland reassured them that they are now building a firm and stable wall that will protect them. Roland wanted to make a bold statement and show that the demonic beasts were not as frightening as people believed them to be. In his opinion, these beasts were just like any other wild animal found in the forest, but with greater strength. They lacked intelligence and could not scale walls. He posed a question to the people once more, asking whether they wanted to cower in a refugee camp and perish due to starvation, or stand up for their loved ones and protect the border town under his leadership. 날 보고 있으면 I baby 너를 위한 melody yeah 네가 뮤지니까 잘 들어봐 play it